Welcome to History Happy Hour, brought to you by Lehigh Valley Passport to History. I'm your host, George Wacker of Lehigh Valley Would Love Media, and we're here today for another look at the history that makes the Lehigh Valley so special. Today, we're going to be talking about Christian Spring, an exploration of the brewery and other trades in this lost Moravian settlement with Scott Gordon, a professor of English at Lehigh University, and Susan Ellis, the executive director of the Moravian Historical Society in Nazareth. But first things first, Lehigh Valley Passport to History is a partnership of 28 and growing historic sites and resources in and around Pennsylvania's Lehigh and Northampton counties. The group aims to connect you with historical sites to see and things to do throughout our region, all listed in one convenient location at lvhistory.org. The Happy Hour series, the History Happy Hour series, is designed to bring Valley history wherever you watch these things, along with a recommended drink or just a drink sponsor from a local brewery or distillery. If you'd like more information, again, please visit lvhistory.org and be sure to check out Lehigh Valley Passport to History on Facebook and Instagram, sign up for their monthly newsletter, and more. Today's featured brewery is Birthright Brewing Company, located at 57 South Main Street in Nazareth. Birthright Brewing Company is a premium craft brewing company that offers craft beer to retail customers as well as distributors throughout the Lehigh Valley, Philadelphia, and New York markets. Quality beer is the focus of Birthright Brewing Company, in addition to exceptional customer service and craft brew education. Brewing operations occur daily. Guests have the opportunity to tour. Be sure to visit their website or social media for updated information, of course, during this time. You can find them at birthrightbrewingco.com. And, of course, search them on social media. So thank you so much for Birthright Brewing for being the sponsor today. And without further ado, we're going to start talking about the lost village of Christian Spring. In the middle of Pennsylvania wilderness, there was a multiracial Moravian community of master craftsmen and apprentices who thrived for a relatively short period of time. Today's conversation will explore this lost community and the people who lived and worked there. All right, and without further ado, we have Scott Gordon, a professor of English at Lehigh University. He has chaired the English and History department there. He researches Moravians in Pennsylvania, and in 2018 published a book about an 18th century woman, Mary Penry, who remained a Moravian single sister for her long life. Scott, I assume that book is on your bookshelf behind you?
A little poster of the book is on the bookshelf, yeah.
But that's fantastic. Scott, and nobody knows this but you and I, but we've had some fun discussions even on Facebook and some of the groups about some of these topics, because I'm a big fan of pretending that there's tunnels in downtown Bethlehem. But there's so much history, and I'm excited for this. So we got to start it off first with, could you give us a little bit about where is Christian Spring and why, a little bit of why we should be interested in it?
Yeah. So Christian Spring is a couple miles west of Nazareth, just off of Route 248. There's actually three roads that people probably pass that are called Christian Spring Road. There's one off of sort of 191, just past Mitzi's and Josh Early Candy's to the left. That was an old road that would have taken you to Christian Spring. And then if you kept going up, when you reach Nazareth, there's another Christian Spring Road that branches off west to the left, and that would have taken you to Christian Spring. And then there's a third Christian Spring Road where Christian Spring was, which is just at the intersection of Route 248 and Daniels Road. There was a little triangle there. The Monocacy Creek runs by, and that's where Christian Spring was.
And how is it related to Bethlehem? Put in some context of why this area was important.
Yeah. So Bethlehem was the hub of Moravian activity around here. It was the sort of administrative center. All the leaders were here, and it was the center of industry. So the colonial industrial district that everyone knows about behind the Hotel Bethlehem was the center of industries. Industries were happening in the Brothers' House at the foot of Main Street there. But there were a lot of satellite communities that were linked to Bethlehem. And they were sort of called the upper places. And they included Nazareth, which at the time was just the Whitfield House, and the Gray Cottage and another little house. The town of Nazareth wasn't there yet. And then there were a few other places. And Christian's Spring, or Christian's Brewing in the German, that was one of those upper places. There were 6 of them. And they had different roles to play in the whole sort of general machine that was the Moravian economy. So the trades and the industrial work was down in Bethlehem, and a lot of the farming or agricultural work was up in Nazareth. There were a lot of farms up there. So Christian Spring was one of those places. That image you see now is the best and the earliest drawing of what the community looked like. It was never very large. It started off by having a sawmill. A sawmill was the first thing built there. The other sawmill that the Moravians used was way up in what's now Lehigh. All the lumber for the brothers' house was cut down and put through the sawmill up in Lehigh and sent down in the Lehigh River. And they decided to build some sawmills closer. So the first thing they built on the property that became Christian Spring was a sawmill. And then they decided a few years later to move a bunch of single men up there. So the brothers' house in Bethlehem was crowded, and they moved a bunch of single men up to Christian Spring in 1749, I think. And so it's a very small community. There's just about 25 people up there. There are some people farming, people running the sawmill, and some single brothers running trades. And then the most important thing that happens there is the authorities in Bethlehem decide that they're going to use Christian Spring as sort of a votech. They're going to put master craftsmen up there and then put boys up there who are learning trades. And that happens in the late 1750s. And so I think the most important thing about Christian's Spring is that it was an early trade community where master craftsmen trained young men in trades like shoemaker and tailor. They had to train scribes because the Moravians kept incredible records, so they needed people who were permanent scribes. And there was a gun shop up there by the early 1760s where some really talented rifle makers were training young men to be rifle makers and gunsmiths. So it was a very early votech.
And why, this is curious to me, why would they have that community? Because in that time, Nazareth was pretty far away to travel. Yeah. So why are these communities separated so much? Is it just the spring itself?
No, it's actually where the Moravians own land. So the first piece of land they buy are 500 acres. That's Bethlehem. That becomes Bethlehem. I mean, the town of Bethlehem is much smaller, but they have a 500 acre tract of land. And then very soon after that, they buy a 5,000 acre tract of land in Nazareth. They're actually in Nazareth first. They know the lay of the land, but they don't own it. They get booted out of Nazareth. Someone else sort of owns it. They settle in Bethlehem. And then within a few months, they buy the tract that they knew about in Nazareth. So they have a huge rectangular tract of land, 5,000 acres. So they can plant 6 communities up there that do different things.
I don't think I didn't ask this. So I should have already. Who's Christian, or is that Christian Spring as in the religion?
Right. So initially, Christian is Christian Renatus. This is Nicholas Ludwig Zinzendorf, this charismatic leader and financier of the Moravian Church. It's his son. And his son is a single man in Europe, and he's in charge of all the single men in the Moravian Church. He's like the spiritual leader of all the single men. So as soon as they decide to use Christian Spring as a place where single men will be put, they name it after Christian Renatus Zinzendorf. So it's people, the road signs say Christian Spring. And often you hear people say Christian Springs with springs plural, but it's really just one spring named after Christian. So it's Christian Spring, like George's radio station. It's Christian Spring.
So, give me more of an idea. They had 5,000 acres up there. How much do we know about? Because we're going to talk about what's left, which isn't much. Right. How much do we know about what went on there? How many people were there at any point in time?
Well, Christian Spring itself wasn't 5,000 acres. The whole upper places was 5,000. Okay. So in that 5,000 acres was Nazareth, was a little community called Friedenstahl, which had a mill. It was sort of a little bit west, sort of towards 33. And then there was a little farming community called Gnadental, which was right next to what became Christian Spring. There was an inn put up there. So, the Bethlehem has the Sun Inn, but north of Nazareth, they build an inn called the Rose Inn, which is probably a couple miles north of Nazareth. And then they build Christian Spring as a sixth place. So those spread out over the 5,000 acres. Christian Spring is small. If you remember that other image, I don't know if you can put it back up, the one that I really like. But it's sort of shaped like it's in the shape of a quadrangle. So that's a great image. It's shaped like a quadrangle. It takes up a very tiny plot of land. That line running sort of horizontally across this image is the Monocacy Creek. And it's just sort of right there. It's a small place. We know a lot of what happened there, if that's what you're asking. There were those buildings in the back are barns, so there was a lot of farmland, a lot of crops were planted there, and then there were these master craftsmen. So there was like I said, there was a shoemaker, there was a tailor, there was a little scriptorium where young boys learned to write properly. There was a gunsmith that was sort of added on about a decade after. And then probably of most interest to the viewers, there was a brewery and there was a brandy distillery at Christian Spring. And all the beer from the Sun Inn was made for 25 years, was made at Christian Spring. Bethlehem gets a brewery in 1782. So from, the Sun Inn opens in 1760 or 61. So for the first 20 years, all of that beer that they sell there is made up in Christian Spring and sent down to the Sun Tavern.
And I'm going to look smart here, but the Moravians were pacifists. You mentioned they had a gunsmith.
Yeah.
How do they reconcile that? How does that work?
It's a really good question. It's not complicated. It's just sort of needs some explanation. So they were rifle makers is sort of the key thing to understand. And rifles weren't typically used as weapons of war. Muskets were. So, rifles were used for hunting, for trade with Native Americans, maybe for defense. But they weren't typically thought of, at least, as weapons of war. So the Moravians were really accomplished rifle makers. In Lancaster County, in the Moravian church there, some of America's finest rifle makers were members of the Moravian church there. They didn't think they were making weapons of war. So the shop that opens at Christian Spring is a rifle making shop. Most people call it gun stocking. They were really talented wood carvers who could make beautiful stocks for these rifles. And there was just one master and an apprentice. It was a very small operation until the Revolutionary War. What we've discovered just in the last a decade, actually is too long, let's say the last 5 or 6 years, is that little shop at Christian Spring made a contract with the local militia forces, with the Pennsylvania militia forces, to supply muskets. And this is sort of breaking news because it doesn't really jibe with their pacifism whatsoever. It's one thing to make. It's another.
How do you get breaking news from 1755?
No one had looked through these ledgers before and saw these tiny little entries where it said, delivered 50 muskets to Abraham Berlin in Easton.
And then you track down who he is and figure out.
Right. Wow. And there's a receipt that survives. It's still in private hands. It's not in an archive of the delivery of some muskets. So at the same time that the church in Bethlehem is insisting on its pacifist stance, is telling its members not to take the oath of loyalty to Pennsylvania, not to serve in militias, is denouncing members in Lancaster, for instance, who do take the oath and sort of become patriots. So the church in Bethlehem is very strict in its non-engagement policy. At the very same time, the church has permitted the gun shop up in Christiansbrunn to supply muskets, weapons of war, to the local patriots. It is what it is.
And now we get, it's really interesting because it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
When you say breaking news, because it is breaking news. It's something that hasn't been seen since that time period.
Right.
You stopped me from getting into beer. Well, I know I stopped me from getting into beer. Can we talk a little bit about that? Before we got on here,
Sure.
I don't know if this is the right house or the right building, but can you talk a little bit about the brewing up there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've studied the gun trade a lot up there just because of
Okay.
reasons. I haven't studied the brewery trade a lot, except to say that I know where the brewery was, and if one was interested, one can find out exactly the production levels and where they sent it. This isn't the brewery, but it is the house under which the beer was stored. So they
Right.
right. So this
Yeah.
right. So this image is a great image. These are arches built under the stone house that you just showed. And apparently they're called Groind Arches, and they're very rare. These might be the first ones built in early America. It's not really clear, but you can see they're massive structures. And the beer was stored here. We're very lucky that before almost all the buildings at Christian Spring were demolished. This happened in 1890 or so. In the 1870s, some people from Moravian Historical Society went over there and they photographed a lot of them, not all of them, but some of them. And so we have pretty good images of what a lot of the buildings looked like, even though they were gone about 2 decades after these photos were taken. Yeah, so the beer was stored in those caverns. As far as I know, those caverns, those arched cellars, are still there, buried under.
And I hope I got this right. Did you say we were at 248 and Bath Pike and Daniels Road?
Is 248 the Bath Pike?
Yeah, Bath Pike and Daniels.
Pike and Daniels Road. Yes, that's what this is.
Because this is. Yeah,
right.
I want. So
right.
I mean, it's tough to hold on.
So okay, that's weird. So Bath Pike, can you go? Is that looking north? Yeah, keep going the other way if you can. Oh. Okay. Actually, the picture you showed first, the angle you showed first, I think, was the better one.
Yeah, I this is totally off the cuff. I didn't plan this, but no, when you said it, yeah, this is Bath Pike. I think looking east.
Okay, looking east, right? So Christian Spring would be right just south of where you were there. So no.
So it'd be like right here-ish.
That's looking south.
This way. Look.
I think that
regardless, it's right in about the right area. As you can see, there isn't anything.
Right. So here's the interesting thing. I can't quite tell which way we're looking there, but Daniels Road actually runs through the settlement right now, where the settlement was. So if you remember that other drawing of that quadrangle, right. So those long buildings on the far side of that image were stone barns. Those are on the west side of Daniels Road, and there's ruins over there. Then Daniels Road runs right up through the middle of that image, sort of left to right, and then the creek is sort of on the east side of Daniels Road. Hard to describe, but right. So the ruins of those barns are there on the west side of Daniels Road still.
And that's what I was going to ask: is what? What's remaining there now? Is it just those ruins and those cellars? You said off air, you think they're there.
I think they're still underground. You showed a great photograph of sort of a good spread of the settlement. Keep going. Keep going. Right. Okay. So you see that stone building there, sort of left of center? That building survives. That's the only building that survives. And the thing is, it's also the only building that's not on the 1755 drawing or painting, because it wasn't built probably until the 1780s. But all of the other buildings in this photograph that you see are gone. The building just to the right of the photograph from the stone building, that was where the boys lived. So all the boys who were apprenticed to particular tradespeople, they all lived together in that building. And the next building up in that photograph was sort of the house of worship there. But those are all gone.
And I think you might have mentioned this, or I didn't ask, but when did this community then kind of cease to exist? I mean, it doesn't exist. When did that end? And it's long enough ago. How do we, and the Moravians kept impeccable records from what I understand, but how did we find out more about them?
Yeah. You mean, how do we, or how did we? How did we? When did it end? When did the settlement end? And then how did we find out about them? Why did we have all this information? How did it survive to today? Yeah. Okay. So the settlement ends. What we know, what we think of as Christian Spring, which is this trade community with boys and master craftsmen, that lasts from about the 1750s until 1796. The Moravians continued to own the property after 1796, but they pull away all the single men, apparently because they were all drunks. That's not confirmed for sure, but it's mentioned in the sort of later histories that the reason they disbanded this community of single men is they were living with the brewery and the brandy distillery, and they were taking a bit too much advantage of those products. Don't know if that's true, but they basically... It's not unlikely.
You're there, you're working all day. There's probably, after you do all your work, there's not a lot to do. I can understand.
So the Moravians still own the land, though. So what they do is they take all that whole community of single men and young men learning trades, they remove them all, and they move some farming families up there who can just use the land as farmland. So that's really when the community ends. The Moravians own the land for maybe about another 40 years, and they sell it off. But it changes from this really important sort of vocational training place to farm families.
Yeah, I mean, so we've learned about what survives today, the history. Of course, we're going to have Susan on in a second to talk a little bit more about how we can learn more. Yeah. But is there anything else that you find interesting that maybe we didn't touch on about Christian Spring?
I mean, I could answer that other question you asked about how we sort of know about it. I mean,
sure.
They're incredible record keepers. Side note, that's how we know there are no tunnels. But back to Christian Spring.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, so the Moravians kept impeccable records. So almost every year they made a list of the people who were living there, their birth dates, their trades, where they came from, when they took communion, who they were married to, who their children were, not for the single men, but there were a few married couples up there. So every year we have what we call a membership catalog that lists everybody who is up there. After 1762, the Moravian kept impeccable financial records of every one of their trades and what they earned. So we know, and the inventories of the shops, every time they turned over from one master craftsman to another, they would take a full inventory of the shop. So we know exactly what was in the tailor shop. We know exactly what was in the gun shop. We know how much product they made and, what little profit they made. We have lists of customers with outstanding debts. There was also a diary. There was the person in charge of the community kept a daily diary. Now, that wasn't like a personal diary, but it sort of said, here are the prayers we did. Brother so-and-so moved up from Bethlehem, and these two men left Christian Spring. 3 boys were transferred here to learn the tailor trade. So-and-so died. And then they also sometimes talk about events outside the community. So during the French and Indian War, or during the Revolutionary War, soldiers passed through. So-and-so came to visit while he was staying in Bethlehem. So there's an incredible amount of material simply because the Moravians were such good record keepers about the community.
And that's a perfect way to segue into Susan Ellis, who is the executive director of the Moravian Historical Society in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, with an exhibition about Christian Spring will open in September. So Susan, hello, welcome. Hey. You've been watching this whole time. So Susan, thank you so much for taking some time. But can you tell us a little bit about the Moravian Historical Society if you want, and also how people can learn more about the exhibition and where they can get more information?
Yeah, well, that was such a great introduction and thought about the history, and that's obviously something we do here at the Moravian Historical Society is try to preserve that history and learn more about it and share what we learned. So, yeah, we've got an exhibition coming up on Christian Springs. It'll open in September, and towards the end of September, COVID pushed us back a little bit. But visitors to the exhibition will learn, a lot of the things that Scott talked about and some more. We're really focusing on the people who live there, and through the people learning about the various trades that were taught, the whole apprentice system, which I think is fascinating. I would just add, one of the things that we don't know, you asked Scott that question, we don't know where a lot of those apprentices went once they learned their crafts. They went off into the world, and it'd be fun to kind of track them down. The other thing we don't know so much right now is we don't know exactly where all those buildings were. So an archaeological survey at some point would be just a really fascinating thing to do. But anyway, back to the exhibition. So we're hoping visitors will learn about the trades, as I mentioned. A tremendous amount of activity took place. Scott mentioned those diaries. We have records of some of that activity, including the diaries and the account books are found in our collection. They document all of those various activities, including the people who came and went. We have records of how many bushels of wheat, rye, and oats were harvested in 1 year, for instance. It's 1,100 bushels, in case you're wondering. We also, know that in 1766, Christian Springs produced nearly 11,000 pounds of beef, 3,100 pounds of pork, and 1,700 pounds of mutton. So
it seems like a lot. Is that a lot for a community of that size?
There were requirements for all the communities that Scott mentioned, for Bethlehem and for the upper places. So it was a tremendous amount of activity. Yeah.
So the exhibition itself, it will be on the website? When can they find out more information about it?
We're going to add information on our website so people can check that, moravianhistory.org. And, visitors will also learn about some of those other trades that Scott mentioned. We're going to highlight the farmer. We've got some great farm implements and tools in our collection. So we'll have some objects out. We'll have some maps. The photographs. You saw a small sampling of some of the photographs we have. So I think it'll be a really interesting way for visitors to learn about this really unique time and place in our history.
All right, well, we're looking forward to it. This was a lot of fun. I still believe there's some tunnels somewhere. I'll find them one day. But no, honestly, because it's so. I know I didn't get the Google Maps thing exactly how I would have liked it, but the idea was it's interesting that you're just driving by that road every day.
Yeah.
You're going to work, and you don't realize the history and the sacrifice and the lives that were just right there. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you guys both for taking the time today, and
thank you.
We'll be sure to put more information. Remember to visit moravianhistory.org, and thank you guys both for your time.
Thank you, Joy.
Thanks.
Thank you to our guest, and thank you to Birthright Brewing Company, located at 57 South Main Street in Nazareth. Be sure to check them out online and get out there if you can. A big thank you to Lehigh Valley Passport to History. Be sure to visit them at lvhistory.org, and a big thank you to the Moravian Historical Society. You can get more information on them online as well. I am George Wacker with Lehigh Valley with Love Media. Thank you guys, and have a great weekend.